Hello? Hello? Okay, you want to test this in
Testing.
Hello, hello?
Test.
Okay, is this, that's for the audio in here.
Right, but is it on?
Yeah, green is on.
Hello, Justin, can you hear us?
Hello. Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Okay, I can. Okay, I think this works. So I'm going to mute this until we're ready. Go ahead and let Adam know just it's the
Same call-in info, right? Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
but just the same thing as we planned. We just took us a little bit to get the call-in to work. So I think this is
okay.
it. So we'll
right.
go live
Thank you.
shortly. Yep.
All right.
All right, cool. Yeah. Just a heads up, you
that you, Adam?
That is Justin. How are you doing?
Good, good. They're on mute now, but we're just waiting for them to get started.
Okay, sounds good.
Glad you made it.
Yeah, it worked out good in the end, so glad I was able to make it too.
Perfect, thanks.
Check one, check two.
Hey, Bert.
Yes, Justin, that is me.
I knew it was you. How are you?
Doing all right, yourself?
Good. Good. Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry. They found mold in my wall, so the jets are blowing.
Yeah, there's criteria listed. Criteria listed in that move. 9 of them.
So I apologize for not.
They went together, right? I figured I was gonna call Sue. We'll all just come together.
That was lovely, and thank you for thinking.
I had a hard time getting
Right.
through.
This is Laszlo.
Oh, you said all again.
Hi there.
With these recommendations.
I sent you an email. I tried to.
I think I got.
I'm typed in with mine because I need to share some food with you. And there's redundancy.
Hey, I don't think my emails are going through.
Sometimes I wish I was.
One of my Congress. Let you guys. They didn't form a follow-on committee.
Correct. Deborah Gordon, I think, was planning.
Deborah's representative there, right?
Not here yet, I guess.
Not here.
Heather now.
I don't know.
No, we agree. Congress,
So I think, somehow we could.
some legality.
Very well, yourself, sir? Good.
Appoint another committee.
Probably right.
Yeah,
I'm sure we're having a meeting that time.
So we were.
Phone call to one of your
constituents. Your favorite. Get us through this phase here of the response that we got from
But none of it, and I just,
get everybody, and then integrate recommendations into our
say, okay, I want
structure here.
Not filed.
Because I'm looking at the select committee recommendations.
Possibly.
Yeah.
The only way to verify that
We
is
need to have a
get the
report.
actual records
We need to
from
have a meeting.
working with the rival.
Department of Real Estate downtown. They don't know.
And they what? They don't.
They don't
know.
A lot of them.
Hey, how are you? Really? Better now that I got all the technology working, like 10 seconds ago.
Okay, that helps. Got any more?
I mean, I wanted to use this room, I know we have all the speakers and everything, but it was just trying to get that, and we're
Trying to figure it out. Before you let them go?
just for consultants. I didn't make it public because I didn't know if I'd have it. All I had was
Too concerned?
up.
Good, how are you doing?
Chicken head cut off.
Must be nice.
I have counted at least a good 10 rounds of family.
My objection is try to get our other
Yeah, it is. And
And I knew where I was going.
How are you?
representative or
Exciting
supervisor and
Oh, supervisor?
maybe they.
My kitchen.
I'm just using the generic, the public Wi-Fi.
And then they found mold, so.
Well, there might be room at the table, I don't know. I'll trade you.
Some of the hot things.
Where were you? England and France.
Well, I don't think.
Is it very nice?
Oh, just 11.
That's okay. Too fast.
Yeah, you just have a little time. Less than 20 years.
Here in California, you go to that's my.
So you're old, new, gone through it.
Yeah.
Not a fun.
Yeah, did you recognize it?
It'll be clearer.
Yeah, I'm studying Italian right now. Yeah. I'm on Duolingo.
Really are they? I remember you were doing. Right.
So, and then
Just for 3 days, we were in the main area, just like two. We want to stay closer to. So you're projecting them in circles. We don't know that yet. Yeah. So picking the right hotel location. Right.
so you can walk to everything or.
There's a procedure.
Yeah. No, I like that.
Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone.
How are you doing? I know, right?
Hi, everyone. Hi. You know, it is 1 o'clock, and so if we could all kind of start taking our seats, and I'd like to get this meeting started. We only have a limited amount of time, and we want to be efficient, and we want to be effective. We want to be productive, and we want to be thoughtful. So I just really would like to say again, Vice Chair.
It doesn't sound like government,
It doesn't sound like government.
good effort.
We're going to try. You know, I know it's fun to talk and chit chat about all sorts of things that are happening in our various communities and in our skies. And I know that some people think that August is a summer vacation month, but you know, and we are working. So it's so glad to see everybody here. Thank you all for taking time out of your summer vacation and coming. Nice. And you're bringing your lunch. How nice. Board member Borgens and I shared some nuts in Starbucks before coming in. So we're full of nuts and coffee. Anyway, I just want to thank you all for coming and do a quick round the table self-introduction so that we all know who is here, and then I think I'll bring it back and I'll introduce our special guests and advisors and consultants. So I'll start on my right.
Mark Adiego with South San Francisco.
Sue Degree.
Press the little button to make it green.
Sue Degree, City of Pacifica.
Ann Schneider, City of Mowbray.
You have to make,
Ann Schneider, City of Mowbray.
yeah, you just push it once.
Rick Bonilla, City of San Mateo.
Jack Kim, City of Belmont.
Sam Hindi, Foster City.
James Castaneda, Roundtable Coordinator.
Janet Borgen, City of Redwood City. Deborah Gordon, Woodside.
Gene Reindell, HMMH Consultant to the Roundtable.
And I'll introduce Steve Carnes. Steve Carnes is our FAA representative. He is our Senior Technical Advisor, Operations Support Group, and Western Service Center FAA Administrator. And he just came down from Seattle to be with us. Gene Reindell with HMMH. Are we going to have Justin on the phone.
Justin and Adam are both on the phone.
Justin and Adam
Hello.
are both. Hello, Justin. Hello, Adam. Okay. I see Portola Valley Board Member Ann Wengert coming in. We just went around and introduced ourselves. We also have Bert Ganong. He is a steady fixture in our meetings, Noise Abatement Office, San Francisco Airport. We have Kathleen Wentworth, Jackie Spears' office. We have Linda Wolin from Supervisor Pine's office. Do you think Supervisor Pine is coming? No. Okay, we won't expect him then. Okay. Any other people that I've left out? And then members of the public. I want to thank you all for coming. I see a lot of familiar faces, a lot of dedicated people, dedicated to trying to solve the problems that we're having with air noise over our communities. And we think that we're making progress. We think that the FAA is being responsive, but there are some things they can do and some things they can't do. I just want to set a little bit of expectations about the meeting today. The meeting today is to understand the report that's in front of us. Part of understanding the report that is in front of us is that it is not a complete or final report. Okay? We are not here to negotiate the recommendations that we had already submitted in November, to which the FAA has responded. There are 104 recommendations that we submitted. They have responded, I believe, to every single one in one form or another. In front of you, you have two sets of documents that our wonderful staff and consultants, Justin, thank you so much, and James, thank you so much. One packet is the recommendations that we submitted in November, and if you look on the side, it's annotated, meaning that every line on every page has been numbered, except for section B, which has its own little sections that we can talk about. The FAA response, if you go to where the responses are actually beginning after the preamble discussion, they are in the recommendations. There's a little box that Justin has put which identifies a page number from our report and a line item. So we can cross-reference very easily as we go along. The FAA did put it together with the address concerns portion first, and that's what we're going to start with. And I think that we're just going to go through it, and we'll get as far as we can with it. Let's see, what else did we decide to do yesterday on the phone?
This is Gene Reindell again, HMMH. What we want to do is be sure we're understanding the FAA response, which is why Steve Carnes is here. He's to help us understand if we have questions. It's not to question the response or to argue or negotiate the response at this point. We just want to be sure at this point in time we understand clearly the response.
Yes. Do you want to say anything at the beginning here?
I just, with that, I would like to offer that I have been embedded with this process for quite a while. I've been and slept with these documents for a long time, and I may not have a complete answer for you today, but I will commit to you that as we have our discussion today, that I will get you your answer. I may just not have it right off of the cuff today, so just something up front about that. Otherwise, I'm looking forward to a good discussion about where we are and what we're doing. Thanks.
Okay. So our agenda indicates that we will open the floor up for public comments.
Before we get there, ma'am, if I may, this is Bert Ganong with the SFO Aircraft Noise Abatement Office. Wanted to go over a few quick housekeeping items. First of all, we do have water over in the corner with cups. Restrooms, out these doors or out that back door there, it's behind Starbucks near the ATM. If the lights are too low, I can work them. If they're anything else, let me know, and we'll get it fixed. So one other thing was
Parking?
the parking. Yes, thank you. Please be sure to put your name on your parking ticket. Get it to me. I'll go take them down to the office real fast, and we'll get those started. And with your name on it, we can get it back to you. We had one night where somebody didn't sign theirs, and it disappeared. So please, let's get everybody's parking and get it back to where it needs to go. Thank you, ma'am.
What kind of people are we?
Okay, so our agenda is that we call the meeting to order, which I think we've done. We've done a little roll call and introductions. On our agenda, it does say we're going to introduce Stan McLeod, who's the manager, Airspace and Procedures Planning and Requirements, NorCal TRACON. She will attend our next meetings. We thought that for this first meeting that Steve Carnes would probably be the best person because, as he said, he's been embedded with the formulation of this document. However, Than is going to play a very, very key role because her department up at NorCal TRACON, if you've cross-referenced this at all, about 90% have to do with our air traffic controllers at NorCal TRACON. So we need to create a really good working relationship with them, and we're going to depend on them a lot. So Than, in our next working group meeting, she will come in and do a presentation also. So I'm going to open it for public comments. We were expecting a large number of people, so I was going to limit it to 90 seconds. But you're certainly welcome to make a public statement. We're going to limit it to things that are not on the agenda. So if there's, I can't imagine anything that you would say except for the birth of your new grandson. That is not on this agenda because it has to do with noise. But if any member of the public wants to stand up and speak, Bert can give you the microphone. See none.
Yeah.
There's one. Yes.
This is less a comment and more a question. I live in Woodside, and I have been bothered by drones, personal drones, over my property. And that is not certainly, I know, on the agenda, but if you could provide me with some guidance on any activity that may be going on about drones, I'd be very appreciative. Thank you.
We're going to let Bert just give you his card, and he'll follow up with you, or you can follow up with him. Well, if you'd like to give us your name, and then we can follow up with a letter to you, which is what we're doing to all of our public comment speakers. We're following up with a personal letter indicating that we've heard your request and what, if anything, we are doing about it.
Hi, my name is George Wiley. I'm from Santa Cruz County, and we drove up, Jackie Rice and I drove up today to speak about some issues on some of the select committee findings, and I've been told that you're not going to address those today, which is fine. But I would ask, please, that you hold off any irreversible action until such time as the South Bay and Santa Cruz County groups are able to put together a committee down there, because we are underrepresented. We don't live nearby, as most of you folks do. But we are definitely concerned about what's going to happen with the Select Committee and how the FAA responded in their Phase 2 document. So, again, don't do anything until it should be high on the priority to try to figure out a way to get a committee put together like this that represents the people down in Santa Cruz and South Santa Clara County. Thank you very much.
Thank you, George. I have to let everyone know that while we think we're really important and powerful and that we can affect, irreversible change, We really aren't. We serve at the pleasure of the congresswomen and congressmen who actually make all the decisions, but we can make recommendations, and that's what this body does. So,
if I might add, trailer to Mr. Wiley, the San Jose Airport is reforming their roundtable, and two, the Santa Clara County Association of Governments is actually working on a regional roundtable down there, and we should get more information on that fairly shortly.
okay. Anyone else? Any other public? Okay. So if we can just start diving in. James, are you going to drive the images on the screen? We'll start with page 13 of the response tables. And if you look at it, it's the bodega, and it is an addressed concern. The FAA is referencing our page 8 in our document. It's section B, number 6. And so if we look at that, it has to do with the in-trail spacing. So I guess if anyone has any comments on that. I have a question. That it says it's continuously working to improve aircraft setup and sequencing between facilities. We had asked for the study of the impact of increasing in-trail spacing on the bodega arrival. What kind of response or effect does that have?
Okay, and just to offer, the Northern California TRACON provides the spacing on the bodega arrival. They offer, it's primarily, as we've stated before in the Select Committee and at the roundtable, it's primarily for the traffic that's coming from the north, i.e. Seattle, Portland, and some of the activity over oceanic routes. That spacing that the FAA is continuing to address is Northern California TRACON. The team up there is looking at trying to strike a balance more for either east flow. We obviously saw some data when we did our analysis that saw that we were tending to favor more the west side. So they're looking at procedural ways to mitigate that activity. It's not a flip the switch thing and start moving everything over on the east side. So they're looking at dynamically working with the controllers, the sectors. Again, just to tag on to this east side, which this is primarily, I believe, referring to, is that activity flows into the interaction with Oakland Airport, obviously another major player in this arena, and the Diamond arrival, which comes from the southeast side of the airspace. So the FAA, i.e. Northern California TRACON, and our traffic management folks are looking at creating, scenarios and working with the controller workforce to more dynamically use the east side. Hopefully that helps.
That makes sense? Yes. Okay. Thank you, Steve. So does any board member have a comment on that? I don't want to get too bogged down with a lot of these because I think they're meatier topics further. Okay. Shall we just continue on? Okay. The next one has to do with departures. It says that it's an addressed concern, and you can see in your page 13 of the FAA's response, there are several recommendations that they refer to and reference in their response, saying that this is currently in use, standard operating procedures, and that NorCal TRACON is going to continue to reinforce the use of this procedure to personnel through training and briefings, and they go on to say that reduction in airport arrivals and departures may increase the usage of it. Well, that sounds good, but I don't how many people think we're going to have reduction in airport arrivals or departures? No. And if it's standard operating procedures, how can we get NorCal TRACON to really make the standard operating procedures fly so that it mitigates the noise that we have? If you look at, I guess, our references are on page 10, item B 18 and 24. It's the nighttime hush procedure. Number 18 on page 10. Change number 18. Yeah, there you go. It's coming. And then also number 24. So 18, it says that the standard operating procedure should be flown as chartered overnight flyover waypoint as specified in the procedure. And so evidently it must not be flown accurately enough because it's creating noise over our communities. Kathleen, do you want to grab a microphone, Kathleen? No? Okay. If you do, there's one right there. Sam, give that to her so she can weigh in.
Did you want me to comment on that, or
well, we can't get too bogged down, but I mean, is it
the 30 seconds?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Push the button so that the little light turns green. There you go.
Thank you. High tech. As I understand it, this is one of a couple of related recommendations regarding the night southbound transition. So there's one major one, which is to establish your voice.
You have to bite the microphone.
So there's one major recommendation for the establishment of an official procedure for the night departure to be flown out over the ocean instead of flying like the stick. And then we're saying, in the meantime, while that 2-year process takes place to create that, we would like TRACON to maximize the use of the 050 heading for runways 1 that takes aircraft off to the right and takes them down the bay, rather than a left turn for the stick. To the extent that with the footnote, because I see it coming, and I understand, with the footnote that this does not mean that we want to increase the number of takeoffs on runway 1s, but only for those aircraft that are already assigned to runway 1 to have them fly a right turn instead of a left turn over land. A right turn over the bay instead of a left turn over land.
Ann
Schneider, City of Millbrae. I had some constituent communication that came in last night, and I'm still trying to get my hands on what this means. There is concern that by using the 050 takeoff, that it in fact is going to increase noise, not just in the number of flights, but the type of noise to Millbrae and to northern Burlingame. And I have a somewhat technical drawing up here, but they think that the way the airplane is going to turn, it's going to open up the triangle of noise, and it's going to come back and hit those very same neighborhoods that are already getting one type of noise, and now it's going to be adding a second type of noise. So it'll be taking more of the in-flight noise as opposed to the on-the-ground backblast noise. So there is some concern. If this is going to go forward, then the only thing I can think is that we need to have measuring devices to see if that is indeed true.
I agree with you. I think that with a lot of these responses, we are going to need to implement some kind of a measuring device to measure the impact that it's having one way or another. But at this point, what we have to work with is what we recommended and what they have responded to us with.
And that's fine. In that case, does Millbrae and or Burlingame have to do an official request to put in some additional measuring devices?
I do believe so.
Okay.
But there is a vehicle through the roundtable to do that, and through the airport.
Okay, great.
Yes.
Elizabeth, are we able to look at any graphics when we have these discussions? Because I think we're all envisioning what Ann is explaining.
Yeah.
And, but do we have that capability to?
Well, if, so, so again, if you go to page 27 of your of the San Francisco Airport's report, there is a graphic that talks about, that one may be the night departure. See, that's the only graphics we have. I don't think we have,
Page 29.
Page 29 has a graphic of what they want.
Okay, page 29. And if James could get that on, there you go.
So they're saying they want to have those right turns and not the left turn back over land.
Dave, nice to see you come in. There is a packet of information that we're referencing, so Linda's going to give you that.
No, those aren't it.
Here, she has it across the way. You look at that.
And we're just on second response. So. Okay.
Comment?
Yes.
So last night, City of Pacifica had their city council meeting, and we are spending our vacation time, shall we say, honing in on a lot of specifics regarding Pacifica. So we will have some comments, I'm sure, on all Pacifica items. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. So if yes.
That was a really great comment, because I think that's what we're here for, is for you to get your questions answered and better understand this response, so that the comments and responses are more aligned with what our understandings are. So thank you.
Yeah. Of course, Jean, that's really a good observation, because we as Roundtable board members, we represent our constituents, and so if we can understand kind of what is going on here, then your constituents can also understand and tell us how it will affect their individual communities. Okay. So, do we have any more comments or discussion about the departure recommendation, letter B? So going on to the page 14 of the FAA's response, it's titled Miscellaneous, it's section C, and as you can see that they have addressed the concern by using the NorCal TRACON standard operating procedures, and that they're going to try to reinforce the use of this procedure through training and briefings. And they have identified and cross-referenced, as you can see, you have to go to your attachment D, and it is, I believe, on page 49 and 50, page 49, 50, and 51 of your San Francisco Airport document.
Oh, I see the pages.
They're up in the top left-hand corner.
By the way, can I say I love this the cross, whatever you call it.
Yes.
That indexing, that's very helpful. That'll help us all.
Thank you very much, Justin and James. I did it all by hand. And then they said, well, we've already done it for you. I go, really?
You can't read yours.
No, you can't. But up there, isn't that great? Yeah. Okay. So, anybody want to take a stab at kind of understanding and talking about this visual approach to runway 28 left offshore? You want to summarize that, Jean? I think it's wanting to keep the aircraft over water while on approach and not using, I think, for Foster City, runway 28 left. And so I think they're saying that standard operating procedures are that to the extent that they can not, they don't, but they have to continue, right? Yes. There's a, grab that.
Sort of, I guess, a general question, because a lot of the answers here are, well, it is standard operating procedure, and we're going to enforce that through training and education. And is it not working? I mean, if it is standard operating procedure, why? I just don't understand the process of getting people trained to do. I mean, don't the air traffic controllers sort of tell people where to go?
We'll let
Not like that.
handle that.
I'll start, but, so I think what's important here is that they recognize your concern in this one, and there's two or three that are related to this. One is using the outboard runway, the right runway on arrival. This one is just saying keep them out over the water. They're related. And the FAA understands that concern. They're saying that it's even part of their standard operating procedure is to keep them out over the water more. So some of the things that we might want to do as a body is to come up with ways of monitoring how well they do that. And I know that, you can put gates into the noise monitoring system so that you can see the percentage of use of the right runway versus the left runway. You can also see, how many of them are actually over land versus over water in certain areas. So, while it's standard operating procedure, they do still have a lot of flights that they need to manage, and they're not going to be 100% over the water. And we have to also realize that that's not going to happen. But I think working together, and that's what they're asking, I think that's what they're saying here, is let's work together, monitor the situation, and figure out if there are ways through training and tower personnel procedures if we could do better.
I guess what my concern would be is that monitoring it, I mean, what it is now is unacceptable in different places, unacceptable to people. So are the standard operating procedures not used to the maximum? Is it easier to do something else? Is that why they do something? I just don't quite understand.
Okay. So just for clarity, standard operating procedures, we train our controllers, and it's standard operating procedures are not die-hard rules.
Right.
So it's operating practices. Look at it that way, that this, if you have arrivals 2-8, right and left, it's more neighbor-friendly to use 2-8 right. So the standard operating procedure states that when practical, use, kind of move airplanes to 2-8 right on a more consistent basis. Now, you need to look at the mix of aircraft that you have operating in this environment. You also have to look at the activity level that you have here, which is exponentially increasing as we go forward. That's another one of the challenges to all of us, is the increase in activity. But the standard practice is to default to, as a controller, tell United 222, runway 28 right, vector them for the ILS for that approach. That's the default. When you have the volume pick up, you can't default to that on a continuous basis without then increasing spacing as you go out, which in turn creates more epidemic problems in the national airspace system. So as a standard operating practice, just for clarity, it's not a hard and fast rule.
So
it's a guiding principle.
Did you say it's the default?
Yes, it's the default that we that we train our controllers to use. And what we found, we did some analysis on this at the very beginning of this process, and we found that they weren't defaulting in a standard sort of way. So those conversations have been had inside the building with the controllers at NCT. So Fan and the management team over there is working with their peeps in the house to get more involved in doing that type of activity. It's not a flip the switch and change thing. It's and again, you know, there's the challenges of weather, activity, fleet mix, those kinds of things. But they are moving towards doing it more in a proactive way of defaulting to a 2-8 right activity to make that more of the thought process.
Is there information as to what the situations are when they don't default? I mean, so that we understand if that is essentially the normal situation that can't be changed.
I think that would be evidenced by the measurements, that we would be monitoring, the monitoring. I have a question for Steve. Has any of this already been put into place in a real-time basis? I know that, it's ongoing, we're going to do training, but has there been a major meeting of the TRACON air traffic controllers and said, okay, these procedures, we really need to kind of step up our game here and try to fly them more accurately to help our residents down there in the Bay Area?
Those conversations have been had there, and it's working back through the documents that we've embedded it more. I know the team has embedded it more in their training syllabus to be more proactive at that, to kind of set the genetic foundation of a controller working that sector to kind of, in their mind, kind of go to that first. It's like, it's like driving a car. I mean, you do certain things because it works better to stay in the right lane and not in the left lane because everybody's coming head on to you. It's that type of thing that we've been integrating into their thinking. Again, it's not an overnight switch thing. They know we've been having these conversations. It's been ongoing for going on 2 years, over 2 years now.
2013.
So yes, it's happening. I like the idea of maybe doing some gate metering. I know Bert and his staff do that. This one says work with the noise office and the FAA to outreach to pilot controllers. We've reached out to the controllers. I don't know what the activity has been out to the pilots. So.
All right. Sam? Yes.
Thank you. So I think the challenge for us that this has been on the book for quite some time, but it has not, as you mentioned, not been followed necessarily. So it's not just monitoring that's not going to solve the problem. I think we need some kind of mechanism to where these standard operating procedures should be enforced somehow, some way, and the pilots or the airlines that violate these procedures need to be held accountable in some way or manner. It's good to be good neighbors, but what if they don't? What is our alternative? So a pilot decides it's more convenient for him or her to land, to fly over Foster City, for example, for no other reason, quite honestly, especially when it's coming in single-stream aircraft. Why are they overflying our homes rather than being over the bay?
Closer to the terminal. Closer to the terminal.
So I think there's got to be some mechanism so people are held accountable for not following the rules.
Okay. Just a minute. Doug?
Just to follow up on Sam and Deborah, if I understand this correctly, when a plane approaches, is 100% of the decision about where that plane goes in the hands of the controller?
For safety, yes. But if the pilot and the flight crew request an ILS runway 28 left, the controller is going to assign them runway 28 left if that is their request and the controller has no safety issue not to do that. That aircraft is asking that controller for service at that point, and they're not going to go back and forth and say, well, we like to land 28 right because of, that conversation is not going to be had. So that was my point about work with the noise office and the FAA to outreach, to have this broader conversation about, yes, we should be out over the water more. I get that. I understand that. That's the conversations we're having with our controllers, and primarily through training.
But as was said before, the SOPs don't mean that every approach avoids Foster City, for example, and goes over the water. There will be times when the controller or the pilot does go over the city, but that is a case-by-case situation. In other words, let's just say that we up our monitoring game and we find that there's 10% of incoming flights that still go over Foster City. Is that a violation of the SOP, or, will SFO say, look, there were operational reasons why those 10% had to go there, and that's just the way it is?
Well, it's like in any other environment. I mean, at many of the other airports around the nation, we collect that type of information and we share that with the customers, with the users. We have user-customer forums that we interact with our traffic management folks, the airport's authority, and the users of the airport, the airlines. And we share that information with them that, okay, the expectation is that, we stay here. That's not a hard and fast rule to stay on 2-8 right.
I guess my final question
actually states that.
If a year from now, after more training has been instituted, and let's say the folks in Foster City, again, to go back to this example, still are unsatisfied, would the FAA say, look, to go from 10% to 5% means that we're going to have to sacrifice safety or throughput? Is that ultimately what this comes down to?
They'd never sacrifice safety.
Yeah,
they would never sacrifice.
Yeah, safety's our primary interest, and it's just.
I'm really glad about that personally, but still.
He wants to know if that's the only reason. On time.
Oh, right. Would that be the only reason? Deborah.
This is a follow-on, which will help in a lot of these, I think, for me anyway. Do we know what percentage of the time the pilot asks for a specific?
No.
No.
You don't have any
No.
idea?
I don't think there's.
No, and honestly, that's again back to the original factors. Weather conditions, the wind, the activity, the ceiling, what the cloud cover is. Is it raining, and what intensity is rain occurring? The aircraft, depending on their weights and balances, there's a whole variety of reasons that an aircraft could be asking for that.
Right.
A lot of times, and honestly, just to be transparent, it is just because it's closer to the terminal. And, they're coming and they've been flying from Miami, and they're set up on, for expect runway 28 at San Francisco. They're told by the center coming over Lake Tahoe. And so they line up for 28s. The captain and the co-pilot look at their book. Hey, 28 left's close to the terminal. Ask for 28 left. Boom. First thing they say to the controllers, request runway 28 left. The controller's going to go, boom. They got to have 28 left. And so that's the conversation, the broader conversation that we need to have to where we get to a state where we are managing aircraft as a system, and this is all of us together, managing aircraft as a system to get them more out over the water, away from the environment that they're impacting, and just have that and then as that gets built up and it requires a pressure point, then we start coming back off to 28 left. We're not there right now. The conversations are going that way in the air traffic world. I don't know that that's happening on the pilot side of the business.
We're going to let Rick Bonilla and then Sam, and then we may want to move on.
Thank you. So I think I want to just kind of restate the same thing a little bit differently. Would it be possible that we could say that our recommendation is that they come in on 28 right unless there's a safety reason, in which case they need to use 28 left?
Okay, so the point being there is restating the recommendation. What the FAA has is that recommendation that we got in the report.
Which is, our recommendation was,
So as far as a hard and fast rule to go to 28 right, I don't know that doesn't exist in this environment.
EI.
Page 17.
And our recommendation is 2EI on page 53 of our recommendation. It said, it's 2EI?
All aircraft single stream to runway 28 right.
Sorry, can't hear that?
Yeah.
We can't hear. No, it wasn't. It's not on that.
Okay.
It's not 2. No.
Oh,
E2 says runway usage, runway 28 right is a priority.
And they're doing that as a standard operating procedure at Northern California TRACON now.
Page 17 of their response.
Now, what that's gaining for you from where we were before, Sam, is,
not this one.
that may be worth analysis.
If I may, so my comment really wasn't related to 28 right or 28 left. I was referring to flights, even if they are landing on 28 left, which we understand that there will be many incidents that there will be 28 left. My comment was mostly related to flights that are landing on 28 left, yet they get off the line and overfly Foster City. How could we enforce them not to deviate from being either tangent to Foster City like they're supposed to, or a little bit over the water, rather than bisecting the city? I'm not arguing why are they on 28 left.
That's a little bit trickier, and Bert's got his hand up there behind you. Maybe he has a comment.
Where is he?
He's coming around.
He's coming
around.
Bert?
There the other computer here, sorry. So.
That doesn't work very well.
No, it doesn't, but it's better than nothing. So 28 left, if you actually ran the center line of the runway out past Foster City, it actually bisects Foster City at the end. So it goes about 300 yards to 400 yards inland on the true center line of that runway. And so that runway, when flown as charted straight in on the approach, will overfly Foster City. That's why we ask and have asked for years, and the TRACON is working with us to get more 28 right approaches in use.
Okay, thank you.
I say something real quick.
Yes, Gene.
I do think we need to move on, but I want to make it kind of help set expectations here. There's during especially peak times here at the airport, and they're in their most common configuration. They're departing the 1s and arriving the 28s. And during that time, you can actually see them lined up 2 at a time. They're landing both runways and departing both runways. During those time periods, they have to use 28 left. So there will be a lot of times when you just can't avoid using 28 left, and the separation requires them probably to be over Foster City on runway center line at that point. I think what we're asking for here is that we, during other times that those both runways aren't needed to get to land the aircraft here, that their preference, their standard operating procedure is 28 right. And that's what Steve is saying, that they are beginning to communicate that to the controllers so that they can do better at that, because I think they are providing flexibility to come in on 28 left. There are many reasons to come in still on 28 left, even during those other times, but we're trying to limit those to when it's really like a safety or a real urgent need for some reason by the airline. But that's going to take communication with the airlines as well as the tower to get the best we can. And so when we start monitoring that, then we can see how well we're doing and what things might we be able to do in addition to improve that.
That help?
Yes, I understand the dual parallel
right.
landing.
I just didn't want people to think that
Yes.
you can avoid it. Ultimately.
No, it can't be. But in other situations, if it's only single stream, then we would like 28 right to be used. Let's go on to the next one, and it's in the middle of your page 14. It's the middle one, having to do with the trunken departures east of Highway 101. If you look at page 55 of our roundtable recommendations, it it originally had been listed as a not feasible, and now they say they've addressed our concerns by working with NorCal TRACON. It has to do, study the increase in use of Shoreline 7 departure off runway 28 right or 28 left. So I think it's similar to the response that we received above and the situation. Does anybody want to make a comment on that? Okay, let's go on to the next one, which is the recommendation is to work having to do with page 57 of our document. And page 57 of our document, it's adjustment 3BII, and saying that NorCal TRACON will continue to be an active participant in roundtable meetings and providing leadership through seeking solutions. And this has to do with our interactions and agreements where feasible. So I think that that is a continuation of all of our involvement and our Noise 101 workshops, et cetera. So they are agreeing that they will continue to work with us on that. Any comments?
Elizabeth, if I could just add, is that section right there doesn't stop with NCT. It includes the overlying administrative district. You have their full support. The Air Traffic Services, those of you that remember the name Glenn Martin, he has moved up to a higher level in that organization, that line of business. So I just offer that it's not just NCT will continue, it's the FAA Air Traffic Service community will continue to work with you.
Thank you. I think we need to invite Mr. Martin back for a little party or something, you know, kind of show him a good time in San Francisco again.
Well, and the other, you have Mark Paulos, it's a very active participant in the tower also.
Okay, because as I understand it, Glenn Martin, who is a great advocate on the select committee process, is head of all the air traffic controllers nationwide, sort of.
Sort of.
Okay. All right. Going on to page 15 of the FAA's response, the first item, it says addressed concerns, and it has to do with a select committee. We are not going to address that at this point. We'll go down to the middle one, which is addressed concern regarding, if you go to page 49 of our report to them, then we'll be able to look at the section D1B III having to do with not having aircraft turn prior to 9 miles DME from SFO. So let's look at that. Page 49. So is this the right reference? Page 49, DIB, yeah, 1BIII, page 49. It has to do, is that?
It's down to, it's 3/4 down in the paragraph there.
Line 30, no?
Oh, it's
30 to 48.
It's in the subsection B.
Okay.
Yeah.
At the line 45. Additionally, we would like assurances from the FAA to the maximum extent possible not to turn aircraft over affected communities prior to 9 miles from the SFO VOR, which is 9 DME. Final from the airport consistent with NorCal TRACON informal noise abatement agreement. Well, that seems like a no-brainer. Any comments? I'm going to highlight that.
Where is it on this paper? 15. It's getting used to coordinating. And then 49.
I got 49.
Everybody up to speed with this? Shall we go on?
Yes.
Okay. The last one on page 15 of the FAA report is referencing our C section. If you go to section C, it's page 20, page 38, and then D section, page 51. Let's take a look at this.
We're going to have to change.
So it has to do with our nighttime arrivals. And if they choose to file a bodega flight plan, that they should be assigned to an east downwind to prevent overflying our communities. And they say that the address concern will have to be the NorCal TRACON will have to help us enforce that. And on page 20, it is the collaboration item number 2, which we've asked them to let the roundtable work with airline representatives to request during nighttime hours airlines fly oceanic flight plans that follow the path of bodega arrival assigned east downwind for runway 28 down the bay procedure instead of over the peninsula. Any comments? Oh, Ann, yes.
Steve, a quick question for you, since it falls under the similar category of you're working on it, as you will. Has there been any appreciable change in this, since this has a very material impact on a lot of peninsula communities?
Yeah, it was, as I mentioned earlier, we haven't done any value-added analysis on our side of the fence since this conversation began, since last fall. We have had some conversations internally about taking looks at, and we did a lot of that work during the discussions with you and the select committee. We did a lot of comparisons. I and a couple others have broached internal to our analysis team back in Seattle to start looking at, has there been a change? Have we seen differences? You as citizens may be able to equate that. Probably not. But I think we could take a value-added look at flight tracks to see how much more we have gained in this kind of scenario. We have not done that to this point. So that is something on our list of things to take a look at.
Thank you.
Something that we should request, I think. So the next reference, if you look at it, it has to do with a long-term solution. It's on page 38, item number 6. So while they're saying that they've addressed our concern, and it has to do with the NorCal TRACON, it is a longer-term prospect having to do with the nighttime arrivals to encourage them to file for SFO arrivals that avoid flight over sensitive areas. And again, it seems like it's almost in direct correlation with the one that we just, talked about before, but that was a collaborative thing. So they're agreeing that we need to have this as a long-term solution. So we need to stay on top of this as we go forward, I think. Yes, Gene?
I have one question for Steve. Are there airspace conflicts that come into play for the east downwind under those conditions?
Yeah, similar to the ones that I mentioned before, the interaction with Oakland Airport. If during this nighttime arrivals time, you've got a significant push off of the Oakland Airport that tends to use some of the bay for their southbound departures. That's just an activity they're doing now, right? That, you know, that they're some of that is shortcutting, some of that is the nature of what they've been doing, and some of it's not following the full breadth of approaches or departures that they're utilizing off that airport. So Oakland is one interaction piece. The other one is the diamond arrival mix. If we have that, you know, if we have a significant push coming in from on the diamond, there's no volume absorption there that we can use. We have to go to the west side for the bodega to interact and to space aircraft. This, like Elizabeth alluded to or did say, was the long-term goal would be to start putting this into play as a traffic management process. We would meet our aircraft further out to use the east downwind in these kinds of conditions so that we can mix and match and do a better job of that in the future, long term.
So the third reference in this section, not to belabor this section, but I think it's important because if you look at page 51 of our recommendations, it's section D, number 2AI, and it's at the kind of lower half of your page, 2AI. Now, this section is referenced here as addressed concerns. This section, it's kind of a big section because it has a lot in it. Further in the report, it is referenced as under evaluation. So I think we have to look at this. And when I first looked at it, I thought, well, gosh, you know, they've addressed this whole concern here. And then as I kept going through the report, there are two other references where it's just under evaluation. So I think that we need to pull out and highlight just what we're talking about here in this addressed concerns. And maybe I can get some help with that. I think it's maybe subsection B, and would that be it, Jean, you think, of that, subsection B? Bodega 2 procedure include waiver, would that be it? Okay. So I'm going to highlight that for me.
So, I'm sorry, could you say that?
Say that again? I'll say that again.
But in a different way.
I'll try. So this section, our recommendation on page 51, which is adjustment number 2.A.I, sequencing and vector points, where originally the FAA said that was not feasible, we went back and said, look, this is what our recommendations are. In this recommendation that they came back and responded to, they said it was addressed concern, and they referenced this section as an addressed concern. They only referenced, they should have said sub-point B.
Just that,
because there is later in this document two other references where it is under evaluation. So the bulk of this recommendation is under evaluation. Okay, so I got very excited about that. And then,
right.
but, and, you know, just reading their little shorthand notes here, Steve, about, you know, how you're responding, it wasn't, you know, robust. Didn't kind of explain everything.
I just want to be sure that we're not, it's not being explained by asserting that it's been done.
Right.
Or it's addressed in other places.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Anybody, anything else? Okay. Oh, my goodness. So let's go to page 16 of the response. It's the subsection D, night, hush. Uh-oh. Okay. And we're going to reference our page 10. It's section B18.
Right.
Did everybody have B18? Bingo. Okay. Sorry, I had to go there. So sorry. Okay. So the night hush procedures, we'll continue to reinforce use of this procedure to all the personnel, and it's the same as before, to fly as charted over the night flyover waypoint, and so they're going to keep trying to make that better for us, right? I have to make a note that further on in the report, they have noted B18 as an under evaluation paragraph also. What does that mean?
Just to clarify, the under evaluation piece of that is because we found, and I don't know if you have got these kind of numbers, I think you have, but from July of 2015, when the Hush was flown not out to the night intersection, and it was aircraft were vectored off and peeled off and considered not following the procedure. This July, we followed the procedure. We had kept the aircraft on the procedure until night intersection. The residual effect was the backlog on the surface at the airport, the backup and departures. We had significantly more delays, aircraft actually waiting to go because before, if you remember that graphic where they go up the bay and they were peeling off and going to the east side, we were able to run aircraft more, knowing that activity was going to occur. If they're going all the way up tonight, we have to meter them off the airport because they're going to be in that configuration. We're not going to be, the controllers are not going to be gaining that spacing out there. So with the knowledge that they've got to go all the way tonight, they meter them different, so they sit on the ground longer and they come out and get to the runway, and that creates another set of issues that are addressed in the document elsewhere. So it's that, domino effect of the interaction, and like I've been talking to, interaction with Oakland, interaction with other arrival procedures. It's those parts and pieces that come together. That's July from last year to this year. We found that was an interesting little dynamic that we had asked the controllers to do something. It created a different effect than the expectation was.
Anne?
Sure. Does that mean then that more planes get pushed off later and later and more of them fall from evening to nighttime? Is that one of the reasons why it feels like we've got more planes taking off between 11 and 3 a.m.?
It could be. I don't know the particular numbers for that. That might be a
So you're saying that they're delayed? You have to leave more time between airplanes.
Correct.
They're all leaving on runway 1 left or right. So as they delay, that pushes that particular type of noise later into the evening. During the day, I'm not so concerned.
I don't know that it does, but
Certainly has that potential.
yes.
So in the data that we collect, do we collect that kind of data? And do we get it in the current Fly Quiet report?
Bert can speak to the Fly Quiet report, but you do get, we don't know why the delays are happening, but we know that they're taking off later. We can look at the time of day that these aircraft are taking off and seeing whether or not they're, before 11 p.m. or after 11 p.m. and how many are taking off after 11 versus before 11. We can certainly do things like that.
Deborah?
But isn't it possible to predict the outcome of going?
You would think.
I mean, instead of just saying, well, we didn't know it was going to do this, it would seem to me that we're so careful we ought to be able to model it and say these are the things which could result from changing this, that, or the other thing. I mean,
okay, I would offer to you that we, the FAA, don't set the schedules that the airlines put in play to put passengers on board and move and go and arrive. So if you look at the July flight schedules, I would expect that from 2015 to 2016, if you compared schedules, probably similar time frames, arrivals, departures, except for the fact that there's been an increase in activity, so there's more of them. What we did different in the air traffic world was, as requested, kept the aircraft on the procedure. That requires us to provide a different level of spacing on the procedure than what we were doing in July 2015.
Right, but wouldn't a more, maybe from my point of view, a more appropriate answer be when, if we do that, it will push flights into a later time, because the airlines are going to keep their schedules the same, and we're changing this one thing, and it will back up flights on the ground. Wouldn't we be able to understand that before we saw it happen?
I don't know. It seems to me the data should be able to get captured, and we could at least.
I'm just saying, if we
You wouldn't even have to
do
wait
any
for
modeling
data.
of changes, I expect you do a lot of modeling.
We did a lot of modeling when we were walking through this conversation. We presented those types of things that may occur. We offer that in a variety of scenarios. If you wanted to do, I don't know, pick one. There was, we talked about the spaghetti bowl that sit out there. Okay, if you do a set of dog legs that you used over a different time frame or days, how would that impact? Well, we showed the effect of that. We did talk about the fact that at one point in the conversation, I don't know where that was, but I know we had conversations about if we depart aircraft and they stay on procedures, that's going to exponentially back up on the ground. That's a fact of life. We've known that forever. That's the physics of separation of aircraft. We were separating aircraft on the hush in the night procedure by peeling them off with that expectation the controllers can move aircraft quicker off the ground. So if the controller at the tower is sitting there and the TRACON controller says everybody stay until night intersection tonight, the tower controller acts differently, provides 3, 4, whatever mileage between the successive departures. That in turn starts to take airplanes and back them up. Now we have stuff in play to help us manage that so they're not sitting out at the runway, but it was an interesting look at the numbers from July 2015 to July 2016, and I offer it's not all because the controllers were taking everybody out tonight. It's the increase in activity, and it's a lot of factors. So it's the kind of thing that I'm just offering that as we move forward with any of these types of recommendations, we need to make sure and do the backside analysis to where did we get the bang for the buck? Did we create the vision of what we were going for? Yes, modeling, it can only tell us so much because actual traffic world tends to be quite different than our modeling. We're getting better at that, but
so if I can just maybe, it seems like these procedures were created at a time when there was not as many aircraft wanting to depart at the same time. And if the airport and the FAA have no control over the scheduling of these airliners and how many planes and how closely they want to send their planes out and departure, that doesn't make sense. That's not good management. I mean, you just can't allow people to say, well, I want to take off at 8:10, 8:15, 8:20, 8:25, and expect to really be able to take off. I mean, you just can't. So that seems like there's something broken there, Steve, but I'm not here to renegotiate. That's just an observation. But I think that we're all saying the same thing. I mean, Deborah's saying the same thing, too. I mean, you should be able to figure that out.
Right, but just to clarify that, the airlines set their schedule based on a variety of issues, their business model, what their expectation is for having aircraft go from point A to point B. San Francisco is just one piece of that puzzle. It interacts with Narita. It interacts with Miami. It interacts with New York City. It interacts with London. And all those pieces and parts that timing of that is in the business model of the airlines. They're in the business of doing that. They set those schedules. Now, drivers such as this, if they find themselves for their 10:22 departure going to London, if it sits on the ground 6 out of 7 days of the week for an hour and 10 minutes, they're probably going to start rethinking their schedule the next quarter or the next 6 months because it's costing them, it's the bottom, it's costing them something for that aircraft crew, passengers to be sitting there and not arriving in London at the time that they had predicted. So, but they do set their schedules. We as controllers, we as the airport, it's, as we see those choke points, we have those discussions day in, day out. But it's just that. We see this, and then it'll happen on a Wednesday night. It won't happen for the next 13 days, and then all of a sudden another Thursday night comes up, and you have the same dynamic. It's a variety of factors that play into that. So.
Okay. So real quickly,
Elizabeth brought the point up that I wanted to make, but I'm going to go a step farther. Are there certain airlines that have a tendency to have their planes pushed into nighttime? And is there a way to identify certain flight patterns? Is there a way to identify it so that there can be pressure put on the airlines to say, every time your planes keep switching into midnight or the horrible midnight to 3 o'clock in the morning, then that is causing a problem. That's not something you can control as the FAA, but it is something affecting the sleep patterns for people at the end of runway 1 or 10, if they're using 10, whatever runway it is. So how can we look at that and put pressure on that way? And that might be beyond the scope of this roundtable, but it's certainly going to help me sleep better at night when I can't get to sleep in that 3 o'clock hour when they go every 2 minutes.
Okay.
So I would like to see that data.
Well, we're not asking the FAA for that data right now. We would have to through our roundtable, but not now, because that was not part of our recommendation.
Formal letter. It just wasn't something that I thought about before. That every time we delay, we push people into the middle of the night and we don't sleep.
Understand? The airlines, not the Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
When you do these models, you have the airline schedules. Are they included in the models? Not that they're changing, but are they included in the model?
No, what we do is we look at historical data when we do our modeling. So the airlines, what we would look at is
What they used to fly.
Exactly. And then if we would know that there's been a 12% increase in traffic from that date to that date, we calculate that into our, and then we have them that fly.
But it does seem you could use current flight schedules.
Turn it up a little louder, Deborah.
It does seem you could use current flight schedules and have a model that you plug different variables into and...
Yeah, we don't have the resources of the staff to do that.
That might be something that we can kind of talk about, but that wasn't part of our recommendations. Everybody ready to move on?
Actually,
Yes?
I'm not.
No?
I'm not sure there's a problem here. If our goal is to have them run the night procedure to give relief to the communities that were affected without it, and if that backs us aircraft on the ground at SFO, and eventually the airlines have to look at changing their schedules so they're not sitting on the ground, where's the downside?
It's a downside. Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, if the procedure is the procedure.
If I was running the airport, I would see that as a downside, but I'm not running the airport. I'm trying to bring relief to the community. So the outcome isn't bad from my point of view.
Yeah, I'm with you. I don't know.
Okay. So where are we? Are we at the second recommendation from the night hush on page 16 of the FAA's report? Again, having it refers to the same ones, so I think that we've discussed that.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on. We'll go to page 17 of the FAA's report. It's item number E, SFO runway 28 arrivals. It says they've addressed our concerns per published procedures during both daytime, nighttime. NorCal TRACON continue to reinforce the use. So there are 4 recommendations that they have responded to. Actually, there's more than that. It's in our section B on page 17. Items number 12, 13, and 14. If everyone wants to take a look at that, I think James has it up on the screen. 12, 13, and 14, runway 28.
A lot of this we had discussed
Okay. So if we've already discussed that, let's move on. And I think the second recommendation on that page also, correct? Okay. If it's okay with everyone, we'll move on to our page 18, which is section F, San Francisco-Oakland southbound departures. So it's going to reference our page 13, B37, which James has on the screen. Anybody have any comments about this? Yes. It's page 13, item number 30. Again, this item also has an under-evaluation from another recommendation that is later in the document. So avoid non-safety vectoring prior to safety waypoint, having to do with vectoring.
Keeping it higher up, going over the ocean.
And I guess it's also having to do with the stick departure.
Dispersal.
Laszlo?
Yeah, can I speak to this?
Yes?
Okay.
We have a member of the public, Visepi?
These are the ones that...
Vesperini?
Yeah, he's going to go for the port. Good.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
So I'm a one-trick pony. The one thing that I'm interested on is to vector departing aircraft away from the coastal cities over the ocean. So I'd really like to get input on what would prevent aircraft to go to Vimy instead of port, which is directly overlaying the entire coastline from Pacifica all the way down to Pescadero, about 90,000 people. So is there a reason why port needs to be where it is? Thank you.
It used to be in a different place.
Okay. Our recommendation to the FAA was to say that if vectors are needed for safety and regardless of altitude, that we want them to avoid vectors down the peninsula to waypoints beyond port. So that's our recommendation. They are responding to it. And so further on, I think we have made a recommendation about the port procedure that we haven't gotten to yet. So
I see.
thank you for, yes. So
the issue is, though, why to recommend something that would involve port when it's clearly affecting the coastal communities?
well, that's just how we recommended it last year. So maybe we didn't recommend the exact right thing for you, but this is what happened.
What we're talking
but
about.
is there a
Right.
is there a technical?
We can't renegotiate. Listen.
No, it's not a negotiation.
No, but we can't bring something new, a new idea into this as a discussion to expect a response. All we can work with now is the response to our specific recommendations. If there's something else that we want to do at a future date about that, then we'll have to do it differently.
Okay, then
Yes.
just last word here. Then I shall come back here on page 39, where it says a recommendation is to the replacement of waypoint to replace or augment port and SS stick waypoint. So there is such an item.
So we will get to it if we go through our document here. Okay?
Thank you.
Deborah?
I would just like to clarify what this says. And
Yes.
does it say that there...
Can't hear you.
Yeah, it's on.
Does it say that the reason they've addressed the concern is that 99% of the aircraft do what they're supposed to do, and they're going to worry about the 1%? Try and, with education, get the 1%?
I think we'll let Steve explain your status of this recommendation response.
Which would indicate to me that if there is still a problem,
So-
it doesn't answer it, it just explains it.
So that comment, that statement there is that during that time frame, it's a procedure that's coded into the aircraft. The flight management system of the aircraft flies this procedure.
Mm-hmm.
So 99% of the aircraft were within criteria for that procedure for that time frame. That's a very good usage of a predictable flight track. That flight track is predictable because air traffic counts on that to manage other traffic and activity around it. Does that help? I don't know.
But what I'm saying is it doesn't exactly address the concern. It just says 99% of the planes are going that way, which seems to be a concern, if I'm reading that correctly.
Okay, so I guess
let me just say really real quickly, because our recommendation indicated that there are early vectors causing dramatically increased noise. And what the FAA said is that they studied it and found that 99% are actually flying the procedure. And so our assumption, our recommendation was that there was early vectoring. And they're saying that it's not. Now, this doesn't address the port, down. It's just flying the stick procedure, I think.
Well, that's what I was.
Is that what you were going to say?
So look at the time frame, October 2016.
Yeah.
That was last October. The FAA, had heard a lot of conversation at the table about the stick. Gentleman, some of you may know him, Cliff Lentz, had several conversations with us, and the TRACON had heard that back at a time frame before October 2016. Some aircraft were turning earlier than that. The 99% success rate over that procedure at that intersection was a win for that environment that Cliff spoke to us about. So
But
I don't know if that helps.
It doesn't address the port departure.
Correct.
Because that's a huge issue.
That's further
and
out.
it could be solved pretty easily, I think, but we're not there yet, right?
Right.
Okay. Anybody else? Yes. Ray?
Yes.
I think can you hear me? Chubb? Lights on.
Yeah.
The point about stick and being in compliance 99% of the time has more to do with a 1 nautical mile consideration by FAA. If they intersect that zone, that everything is hunky-dory in accordance with their SOP. The point is, they are consistently turning south, and that concentration is going down the spine and along the coastal areas. So I don't think it's out of the range of your discussion to talk about whether or not the control around stick is adequate from a noise control standpoint on peninsula residents.
Ray, thank you so much. That's a good point. Sue, do you want to add?
Verify that
Yes.
we hear more and more complaints daily.
About the stick departure? But the port, probably the port.
Well, the stick and the gap and the port, what I'm hearing is the tide in Pacifica was bad. Now they're really getting more and more people. It's just really, whatever it is happening. Something's going on.
Gene.
If I could real quick. So I think what this one particular measure and their response to it shows is that they're flying the stick. So, and they're doing it quite accurately. I'd say 99%, you're not going to get any better. It doesn't mean that they're going to continue to do that. We should probably monitor that, or they should monitor it periodically, whatever. But I think what it says in my mind is that there's something else here that we need to address, And I think we are addressing it, and it's under review still by the FAA, and that's some of the port procedures and other things like that. But I think as far as addressing the concern with the stick, at least their response says that it's been addressed because they're flying it very well. That doesn't mean that all the problems in that area have been addressed.
Okay, anyone else? Okay. We'll go on to the next one, which seems to kind of dovetail a little bit, I think. I'm not sure. It's Deputy. I guess we should look at our page 13, B 36 and 38. So our recommendation was that planes should be directed to fly as high as possible over Sepeti Waypoint, over the bay, allowing them to be higher in altitude before turning over land. And the response is that they are when they are no conflicts. And so they believe they've addressed our concern there. I have to make a point that later on in the document, this item is under review also. Under evaluation, I guess I should say. Anybody have a comment on this one?
Where is it again? Under review?
Yes, James, please.
My comment would be I would request that the FAA actually come back with what are some of those conflicts so that we can address whether or not we can do better at having a more unrestricted climb more often. Can we deconflict, if you will, that airspace so that we have a better agreement or better compliance with unrestricted climb? I just think while I agree with them that that's their, well, I have no reason to disagree that that's their standard procedure and that they are unrestricted. I just think we need to look at it a little bit further to see if we can do better by deconflicting some of those conflicts.
That sounds good. Doug?
And just to follow, if we were all successful in reducing conflicts, is this the kind of thing that FAA would be open to as an SOP, or is flying at a higher altitude sort of in conflict with what FAA would see as a reasonable SOP?
I'm not going to speak for the FAA, but I think also the airlines need to weigh in here. They want to get up and out as quick as possible because they save fuel that way. So as far as the airlines, they would want to climb unrestricted as well. And FAA, I think the FAA does what they do for safety only. Otherwise, I think they would want them to get up to cruise as soon as possible as well.
All right. It's 2:30. We have an hour and a half.
Halfway.
We're halfway home? Okay. So we have gone through all of the addressed concerns items. On page 19, we start with feasible and could be implemented in the short term, which is defined as less than 2 years, which sounds like an eternity, I know, but
I have a hard time.
and the first item is the bodega. Nighttime bodega and other arrivals from the north only be assigned to bodega east, downwind to runway 28R right, and NorCal TRACON to update its standard operating procedures to reflect using the down the bay procedure as preferred. That's our recommendation. And they've responded to a number of our recommendations. The first is on page 8 and page 9 of our recommendation document, item B7 and 11, if anybody wants to take a look at that. So B7 has to do with our bodega nighttime hours. And I think, have we discussed this a little bit? We've gone over this runway 28 and 2R and left. Okay. Any other questions or comments on that one? Ann.
Steve, I know that if we were in a courtroom, you couldn't answer this, but just to get an idea of how we might think about these responses in this category of under 2 years, do you have any sense of how long something like this, for instance, would take for you to actually implement?
So for all aircraft on nighttime bodega, is that
right.
how long would that take to implement?
Mm-hmm.
Again, like I spoke to earlier, it's not going to be necessarily an all type thing because of interaction with the Diamond, Oakland. The one I didn't mention before I thought of afterwards was if we're doing the 050 off of the ones going over the bay, that complicates the east downwind even further. So, and honestly, if we're doing 050 off the airport, we're not flying the east bodega leg because safety, it just can't be done. So to answer your question, what is the time frame for something like this? It's how soon can we get there to defaulting to that? That again lies in the TRACON, the airspace, and the dynamics of the airspace because it's never going to be an all east side bodega arrival at nighttime. If we did that, I mean, we could get directed by the powers that be, do east bodega between midnight and 6 a.m. If that was the guidance from on high and we did that in the air traffic world, it creates all that other residual effect. When you're trying to get back to San Francisco and get home at night from San Antonio, you're going to be sitting on the ground in San Antonio. It's that kind of thing. It's the domino effect of that. So, and you truly live in one of the most complicated airspaces in the world. And you're very fortunate to have the air traffic community that you have here. The skill set that resides in this area is incredible. And they do a fabulous job of interacting with traffic. They can, and we are doing things in our training and our briefing for the controllers to kind of get them to move towards those type of activities. Go to that when they, when they can. I can't really truly answer your question with a date. I can't say it's March 2022. It's just, those are the challenges.
Thank you. I'd like to move on to oh, sure. Mary Jo. Say your name, please.
My name is Mary Jo Fremont, and I'm a resident of Palo Alto. So I understand, Steve, all the constraints and so on, but have you done the analysis on the time distribution of the flight for Diamond, for Oakland, for the 050 departures and the bodega? Because I've looked at them at night, and the airspace is empty, absolutely empty. Short of one flight, maybe 1 hour going to Oakland arrivals, maybe, and then we get all the oceanic arrivals on the peninsula. So have you done the analysis?
All right. Okay. The next item is our recommendation that the FAA research reasons for the continued use of Bodega West leg from 2010 to present, and it does say that the research has been completed and can be presented in a suitable form. So, do you have that presentation for us? No. Right now?
No, I do not.
Well, I was expecting it. It's right here in the document.
It's a suitable.
It says suitable. Research has been completed and can be presented at suitable forum. Oh, suitable forum. I was thinking, I'd like to know what a suitable forum is.
There are levels of suitability.
Suitability. Well, we really want to make sure that we're kind of suitable, suitably
Identified
expected.
At your next black tie affair, we will.
We're ready. We'd love to see this operational research. You know, a hard copy would suffice. That is referencing our requested research item number 3 on page 21, that we want them to do this. So I guess the question, has that been done? Do you know of?
It clearly states that it's been completed, so I will check on this.
Drawing a blank. Oh, my gosh. I'm putting a big pink circle around this. All right, Steve.
And you will have to explain why we are not suitable.
Yeah, this is just not suitable. I think we're pretty suitably, positioned in ground zero here, aren't we? We're at the airport and everything. So the next one has to do with Class B, rulemaking, and you've just finished informal public hearings on this?
Actually, that was the date. Well, no, that's truly an incorrect statement, because we did complete the informal Class B meetings, public meetings, and end of January 31st, February 1st and 2nd. So those were completed. The airspace action is in play, and by in play I mean going through the regulatory process of the rulemaking process in the FAA, and it is currently scheduled, the Class B is currently scheduled to be published August of 2018, the update.
Okay. Actually, this has to do with the Select Committee's recommendations, but it's nice that we got a little update on that, so thank you. Okay. It's just a year from now, so that's a pretty near term. And hopefully that will create some remedies with the surfer route, with the Class B adjustment, correct? That's your thinking.
That's the plan currently.
That's the current one. Okay. So page 20, C, departures. We've recommended again about the runway 28 right straight out departures. Determine if 3,000-foot altitude restriction can be eliminated on the Gunner and Westwood departures. So they've responded to all of our, this many of our recommendations, and it's under evaluation. Can you elaborate on this for us at all, briefly, succinctly?
The evaluation is still continuing on these. From what we've looked at, the airspace structure in this area, there are some changes that are being made in the current Class Bravo configuration, not necessarily directly in that environment, but from the lateral airspace boundaries that affect the VFR flyway. So some of that's embedded in the Class Bravo activities, and again, that's not going to be till August of 2018.
Okay. So make a note here. Anybody have a question or comment on this? Deborah?
I have a specific question.
Do we know what the motivation for the 3,000 is? It says to include determining if this one thing is, but do we know why it's there in the first place?
Why the 3,000 was there to begin with? That was, in the structure of airspace, Class Bravo airspace, we're required to separate. It's a requirement to separate aircraft in that airspace. So the departure coming off the ground here was restricted to 3,000 feet because the VFR flyway was over it at 4,000 feet. So you would never prang that airspace or impede that airspace. So it was a constant protected airspace. Didn't mean that every time a departure came off on the gunner that they had to stop at 3,000. But a lot of times what happens is that some of those are rather heavy aircraft going across the ocean, and they're loaded with fuel and cargo and people, and they are slow to climb anyway. So even when there was a VFR aircraft in that airspace, the procedure told them to level at 3,000. What we've tried to look at is, are there opportunities to get them in a more dedicated climb and get them continuing up?
I guess, but my only question was, is that protected area the only reason for this? I mean, this sounds like there could be others. You're only going to look at one. That was just my question. That is the reason.
That is the reason for that, but in the structure of the Class Bravo, they had that conversation, and some of it is trying to move it further out so that we can get more bang for the buck in the airspace.
Well, exactly, because if you look at our recommendation number 28, it talks about if this altitude restriction is due to VFR airspace, determine if a modification can be made, right, and it is warranted. So
there's not another thing that could come into play. But the way
yeah,
it's certainly one
but that was our recommendation. That was what we asked them to respond to.
And we knew this before we went into the Class Bravo conversation, so I offer that was great that you gave us that information before that.
Question.
Yes, Sue.
Is there a reason why it takes that long, another whole year?
For the Class B?
Yeah.
Oh, the Class Bravo?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we have, anytime we do a major airspace action, it's embedded timelines. It has to be published. You have to do the public meetings. The public meetings, yes, they were done in January, February. At those meetings, the public's offered to provide public comment. That comment period ran through, I want to say, don't quote me, but like the 20th of May. After that time period, we, at that time, had to take all of those comments that were brought to the table at the informal meetings or as a result of. They all have to be addressed to ensure that what the public's offering us back as information, we capture in and explain why we're doing this in the Class Bravo action. So as that gets done, then that has to be vetted through, at that point, after we get the answers from the air traffic world and from the rest of the organization, then our legal has to walk through it. So it's regulatory process. It's not, quick thing.
Actually, in the preamble of the FAA's response, beginning on page 8, they go into quite a lot of detail about their rulemaking and Class B modifications and the steps that it takes in Class B rulemaking process. I was a little confused with all the timeline days, and I started adding them all up, and it came to about 8 years or something. So I was wondering, that was one of my initial questions, like, so
we're doing it really quickly.
And that's what I thought, August. But anyway, yeah, I think the bottom line was, something like 302 days. But that's still, that's kind of where we are from now, right? So that was it. So more detail in the report.
But obviously, if this was considered a safety issue, it would be happening much faster, I would imagine.
And I would offer to you not so much the case, because if you recall from our previous conversations, maybe not at this body, but specifically at the Select Committee, we had conversations about this thing called the Surfer Star. The Surfer Star, when the Metroplex was built, it was not contained in Class Bravo airspace. That created a safety issue. Mm-hmm. That was a known fact at March of 2015. So this Class Bravo amendment is on course in the agency action, and it's still taking this long to get that done. So now that safety issue is being managed by the controllers, the excellent workforce controllers that I was speaking to earlier, manage that safety issue, so it's a non-safety issue at this point in time. But the airspace is being amended for that reason and many others.
Thank you. where are we? I turned my page and I lost my place.
Page 20.
Are we going to go to page 21 now? Oh, no, the item number D, miscellaneous. That's right. So I was wondering what category would this be under, and is it under evaluation, or what is the recommendation? What is the process or status? Has to do with vectoring least noise.
So you just want us to vector be less noisy?
Yep. Everybody does.
20.
Miscellaneous.
So it'd be our page 50. You want to do our page 50? It's referring to our page number 50. We don't have page 50.
Yes, we do.
Oh, yeah, we do. Sorry.
Adjustments 1.f. It was not feasible. It was marked not feasible, 49.
One, it's at the very bottom. So, study the feasibility of creating new transitions for night departure for airport southbound destinations. The round, go ahead.
No.
Above that, line 41.
FII.
That, right there.
Not feasible.
Starting with.
With FII, sorry, that's the question, right? Reversing flight tracks. That was a pretty general recommendation, you know. So, and they're just responding to us that they're going to try to work with NorCal TRACON to try to find a solution and do it. It's not specific. Our recommendation was pretty not specific. It was pretty general.
Right.
Does that make sense?
So I think what FAA is saying is that they will work with the roundtable and I assume the airport to try to find ways and places to vector and try to determine whether, you know, we can get noise gains, noise benefits from vectoring differently, but we didn't lay out a specific vector to analyze, so they have nothing to go on.
Right.
And correct, I said earlier that the TRACON, the workforce, is aware of the conversations we've been having at the table, so they know, and this is, again, related back to primarily the vectoring that we're doing over the peninsula. It's quite a bit of, I referred to it earlier as a spaghetti bowl kind of thing. Controllers are aware of that, but that activity, that spaghetti bowl, is created by the fact that you're trying to shovel a lot of aircraft and they have to be managed safely and separated to get to the runway in spacing and in time. So they're looking for opportunities, and again, trying to bring it back into our training, trying to bring it back into our briefing conversations that look for those times and places where we can get better at that.
Okay. The next one has to do with nighttime preferential runway use program, and section, I don't have a page number for the response. It's section C, opposite directional operations, ODOs, short term, item number 2. Do we have a number on that?
Page 33, line 18.
Thank you.
Hours, right? To 22, lines 18 to 22.
Item number 2. So what is the FAA going to do to help us with this? It's under evaluation, correct?
Okay, so, rules for opposite direction operations within the National Airspace System have changed since we started this discussion. The rules are more restrictive. It's always been a challenge in the San Francisco Bay Area with our interaction with the other airports around us. Opposite direction operations in the San Francisco environment, again, have always been challenging, but with the new rules, they've become even more restrictive and untenable. So I know that this is being vetted in a more defined way for the next iteration of the living document. But just so you know that the rules of engagement for opposite direction operations for air traffic controllers have become much more restrictive.
Do you have a comment on that? No. I know safety is an issue, right?
Yeah, there was a restriction put on a few years ago because there was an incident that occurred, not here, but it did limit airports in being able to do head-to-head operations like here and at LAX and other airports around the country. So I guess the only comment I have is, are we able to do them here at San Francisco? And if so, can we increase its usage? You said some of the goals are untenable, or some of the procedures. So how much could we expect from, given the rules today, how often could we have these head-to-head operations?
So you mentioned several years ago that activity, that requirement came into play. Right. This is within the last 8 months, an even stricter requirement. So we weren't doing the activity here at San Francisco in a value-added way. There were opposite direction operations at times when there was no one in the airspace. That kind of activity could take place. Still can, with meeting the parameters of the new guidance, but the rules have become even stricter than from what we were looking at before. So I don't see us increasing the use of opposite direction operations specific to the San Francisco International Airport at this time. Other airports in the area possibly, but San Francisco International doesn't appear to be a candidate for that.
So the rate at which we're using it now is about the best that we can do. Okay.
Any other comments? Yes? Yes? Sure.
What was the incident a couple of years ago? Was it a head-on? Yeah, I think it was something in Texas. Was the incident in Texas originally?
I don't recall. I would have said.
Was there another incident, Steve?
6 to 8 months.
Yeah.
My name is Patrick Tainter.
Patrick, just 1 second. There's a little sidebar going on here.
We're done. Oh, we're done.
Okay. Patrick? Yes.
My name is Patrick Tainter. I'm with Brisbane. The preference for runway procedure is something that has been in place for a long time at SFO, and it affects many communities. The purpose of it is the backblast for Millbrae, Burlingame, and neighboring communities. But when it comes to the takeoffs that are then diverted to runway 28 and follow the night and the trucking procedure, particularly in July, we had a very significant noise problem with flights occurring, very noisy flights, off track, off procedure over several nights between 12 a.m. and 3 a.m. And it surprises me to learn that in July, Millbrae was also having noise issues with flights in similar hours, maybe on the same days, maybe not. Our problem when we looked at the flight data is that these flights were not flying as the procedure as charted. They were not staying east of 101. They were departing runway 28 and then flying significantly west of 101, plane after plane after plane for several hours on end. Now, I hear today, if I heard correctly, that when the procedure is flown as charted night or trucking, that it causes delays at the airport that then domino effect into other problems elsewhere. So this brings to mind that what are we trying to accomplish here? Yes, we need efficiency, we need to get people moved, but we also have to protect our communities. And if a procedure cannot be flown as charted, then maybe during those time frames, the airport is actually operating at overcapacity, and too many flights have been scheduled into that time slot. And I think this is something that must be seriously looked at, and that is an issue which the FAA does have control over regarding airports. You may not have control over schedules of airlines, but you do have control on capacity. Thank you.
They do.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you. Well, that's something that we will, I appreciate your comment, and as a roundtable body, we should follow up and have discussions about that as to what body, what authority really would have that we need to talk to make any adjustments that we want on that, or need, I should say. Okay. Can we go on to the next one, which has to do with night hush again. It's on page 21. Our recommendation was to design and implement a night southbound transition that flies up the bay, over the Golden Gate Bridge, then south, to keep away from the shore line as possible, much as possible. So they've responded, and we go and look at our B section, items 19, 20, 22, 23, and 33. I have this earmarked as it is under evaluation. I wasn't sure if it was or not, but it looks like it's not. It's certainly not in an addressed concern, but I thought it was in something that was short-term, within 2 years.
Yes, we're still in that section.
We're still in
we're in that
the short-term? Good, yeah. So it's short-term within 2 years. So the FAA is saying that this transition currently exists and increased usage is under evaluation. Any comments on that?
Increased usage. Now, how long is that going to take?
Yeah. Well, it's in the short-term, achievable, under 2-year time frame. And I guess that in the next iteration of the report, a lot of these under evaluation, especially in the short term, under 2 years, we would get some response, more detail on that. And maybe Mr. Carnes can elaborate a little bit. Yes, David?
The question I have is there a conflict with the flight out of Oakland with trying to stay more in Bay and over the Golden Gate Bridge and going south? I just wondered if, from the FAA standpoint, is that an issue at all?
And that's true. That was what I was going to comment on, is the interaction that exists with specifically Oakland and the departures off of Oakland. This procedure, it has to interact with that. So again, this is under evaluation by the TRACON. They're looking at increased usage of it, and I would offer it's still under evaluation.
Okay. So this also has to do with a select committee recommendation, and we will await further information from the FAA on this. We'll move on to the next item, which also is under evaluation, and it would be our B section, item 19, and it's on our page 10, having to do with the south transition on the night SID regarding the Oakland departures. So I think that it ties in with the one right above it. Any comments on that one? but even though it's under evaluation, we do believe that should be under a short-term, under 2-year, maybe fix?
Again, the transition already exists. The fact that the workforce and the airlines are not flying it, that's the piece that's under evaluation. It is increased track miles. It is activity that has to be discussed and worked. When we start vectoring airplanes out on the procedure and not taking them off, that creates another level of conversation with our customers that we're providing the service to. So that's a piece of the evaluation.
I just want to remind everyone that you are also providing a service to our communities, and it's not just the airlines. So, okay. Next page, 22, recommendation having to do with timeline for implementation of night southbound. So it's a procedural design and amendments and the IFP gateway entry, and it's currently under evaluation. Anybody want to make a comment on that? Discuss that? So the next two are SFO South arrivals, and they have specifically responses to the Select Committee, which we're not going to discuss. Go on to page 23, and we're going into a longer-term scenario here, which has to do, so the first item is the bodega. To route the bodega east leg arrivals over compatible land use. So it's in our Woodside long-term report. It's page 20. Okay. And it's on the, it's number 2 on the screen.
That's one earlier.
Yeah, we did.
We talked about this one earlier. Okay. Want to make a comment, Gene?
Because this one also has to do, last time we talked about vectoring and trying to find places. This one's a little bit more specific in trying to find places with more compatible land use. So, you know, I think the FAA would be looking to the airport or the roundtable to provide areas that they could be vectoring that are more compatible.
So I would like to make a suggestion that instead of the roundtable recommendation or reference to, it would be long-term number 1 instead of number 2, because I think number 1 talks about compatible land uses. Maybe we need to make that change. Does that sound reasonable, Steve, or anybody? See, in the FAA's response, it's Section C, WO, long-term, number 2, and I think it's actually number 1.
Oh, here it is.
Am I wrong about that?
I mean, collaboration number 1.
No, it's long-term number 2.
Long-term number
2.
It is number 2. They have it right.
But it's, well, what's number 1 then?
Right there. Long-term number 2.
It talks about.
Bodega 1 arrival. Transition.
Bodega finished transition. That's not what this is.
No.
Oh, sorry, I'm in collaboration. Okay, you're right.
Right.
You're right.
Oh, yeah.
I'm wrong. I was not looking at it correctly.
This is compatible use.
Number 1 was the discussion about finish.
It's not collaboration, it's long-term. Okay.
Pretty straight. They want input, right? You guys don't have this one. Yeah, the east down.
Yes.
Do you reconcile talking about
opposed to,
Water.
no, the land, that would be water. No?
Well, water would be non-terrestrial. You're only talking, when you're talking about, and I'm confused at this point,
Glad to hear me too.
is, does the FAA have a definition of what it considers as compatible land? Because I heard you say they're looking toward the round table to come up with some suggestions. If it's a land surface, the most compatible from people's standpoint is over water.
Mm-hmm. But you can't have to cross this one somewhere.
So what are you talking about? Forest areas, national forests, who's the impacted?
Industrial
I can respond to that. First of all, the FAA does have definitions of compatible land use. It's actually Table 1 in Appendix A of Part 150. If you want to go look at it, it's pretty detailed. No, I'm serious. It's pretty easy to find. So they do have definitions of compatible and non-compatible land use. So that is defined. What they're talking about in this recommended measure is looking at the east downwind leg of Bodega, which is over the peninsula, not over water. So by definition, we're not looking over water for this particular recommendation, but looking for more compatible land use as likely defined by the FAA, because the San Francisco International Airport has actually undertaken Part 150 and has, by doing a Part 150 study, has adopted, if you will, for not a better word coming to mind right now, adopted those guidelines in Part 150 for what is compatible land use.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. Maybe what we would like to see is that definition as it pertains to our peninsula. And I would think that would have to be in the noise contour map, correct? Or beyond that?
It can be beyond, because the definitions just show different categories of land uses. While by FAA definition, all land uses are compatible outside the CNL 65 contour. But what we're talking about here is more and less compatible, not compatible and not compatible. So we can still use those definitions of what's more and less compatible as we're looking outside the 65.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah.
As long as you all understand who you can put it over.
Not yet.
Yeah.
Well, that is a good point, though, is that we also have to be careful that we're not shifting noise when we're changing these vectors.
Okay. So I guess moving on to, on page 23, item B, down the bay, nighttime departures. It's currently under evaluation, and it references our section B 27, which is on page 11, and then our ODO long-term section, and our D2EI. So we're looking at B27, which is on the screen, the nighttime hours. I'm going to ask our FAA consultant if he has any insight on to where this is in the evaluation process. It's long-term.
Yeah, this, there was a work group meeting for publication procedure development. This one would fall under the performance-based navigation, future next-gen technology process. So, and part of it is to define that precision-based procedure puts aircraft in specific locations so that what we would gain is what you're asking for here. the discussion at the table was, yes, this would be evaluated and looked at and put in their bucket of process things to do. I would offer it's not on their near term of their work tasking right now. So I can't really give you a date because they haven't got it to a point where it's robust enough to say a publication.
So when we say more than 2 years, are we looking at 3 years, 5 years, 10 years? You know,
I would offer it's probably going to be right after the 2-year time frame. Those kind of procedure discussions, once they have them, and then in many other conversations we've had, when our controllers and those teams are sitting there at the table doing publication development, it's one interacts with the other, with another. So it's the domino thing and the threads that they have to pull together. So it's going to come into play with the other foundation work that they're doing in that work group. So I would offer shortly after the 2-year time frame you would see something like this, if it came to fruition.
Okay. Any comments on this one? Okay, moving on. Hands in the back. Oh, I don't have eyes in the back of my head. Thank you.
I'm just curious, what is the difference between ODO and
The question for our consultant.
Opposite direction operations?
because on runway 10 is the opposite direction on runway 20.
Correct, yes. That is ODO. If you depart 10 and land 28, they're in the face of each other. So, right, well, so that's why they do 2/8s and the 1s. So,
Didn't earlier ODO is ruled out as not possible to specifically due to recent changes in head-to-head flight rules?
don't quote me as not possible. It is possible. It is extremely difficult to do in this environment because of the physics of the location and because of the increased criteria of the rules that have been put in place to actually do it.
And the use of runway 10 falls into that same consideration. Under the
No.
Yeah, not really. If you're primarily using runway 10, and the opposite direction operation would be landing 28. So if you're using 10 for departures and you're landing 1s or 19s or the different configuration, that's not opposite direction. So is that clear?
So you would the landing, the arrival would then be on a different as well.
Correct.
I understand.
Anyone else? Okay. Page 24 of the FAA report. The next one, section is C, sequencing, and the first chart is having to do specifically with the select committee. The next one is talking about our recommendation to increase in-trail separation on Surford Diamond and possibly Bodega to reduce vectoring. I think we've talked about this. Says that FAA is continuously working to improve the aircraft sequencing, and that I don't know why this is in the, I guess, longer term 2+ years, because part of it is in the short term, under 2 years, for the wood side. So, any comments on that? What is that?
I would just comment that it was indeed lean more towards a long-term activity because, as I mentioned earlier, the increase in activity at San Francisco, doing this sequencing and spacing is becoming less and less of an opportunity on these 3 legs.
Okay.
So can I make a comment?
Yes. Janet?
I'm sorry, I got a question. So I apologize for this question, but could you please explain to me where it says reduction, we are on that one, correct? reduction in airport arrivals / departures may decrease the need for vectoring. Is that just kind of like a common sense statement, or am I?
Yeah, no, they've been using that all along.
I think it's a cruel joke, actually.
It is, yeah.
I was like, what am I missing in that statement? I mean, that's kind of a, okay, thank you.
Just a two-finger on that. Aren't we trying to get people, I mean, fewer flights, but more volume of people going out?
Yeah.
Is that what this is referring to, maybe? No. No. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
I think that might be an SFO goal.
Yeah.
Definitely, yeah.
You mean more emplanements and less actual planes?
More bodies, less planes.
Right, and that was discussed at our meeting a couple of weeks ago.
Right.
Yeah, but I don't, because bigger planes can be noisier,
Being careful
right?
what you ask for. Yes.
But the FAA has no dog in that fight hunt.
Exactly. Airlines.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Moving, page 25, under evaluation. Okay, we could just kind of go like this. Bodega, Golden Gate 140 heading versus Bodega 140. It's under evaluation. It's our section B4 on our page 7. So we had requested that the FAA provide data on the Golden Gate Bodega lateral track locations pre-next gen and post-next gen, and if the new procedures can use headings, not tracks, in procedure design. Don't you have some kind of a report that you've done?
Yeah, I was going to say that.
What is that kind of?
Am I hearing that has not been shared with you?
Bert, James, do we have a report about this?
Not that I know of.
I will check on that one for you to find out what's, I was trying, honestly, when I just read this, I was trying to think of the last time I heard this topic at all. So it's been a while, and I thought that information had been provided back to you.
Maybe there is a report.
We weren't appropriate.
Okay, we've made a note.
Thanks.
Maybe you gave it to the select committee?
No.
No. I think Kathleen and Linda would have known that.
Yeah, that one's good.
Okay, and our Menlo Park representative. Hi, Peter.
Sorry.
Oh.
Time for me to go.
Yes, okay.
Can I ask a question before we?
Yes, Gene.
I would like an explanation, I guess, from the FAA about what's the difference between under evaluation and the two previous ones that we did, because a lot of those were also under evaluation, but were short-term, long-term. So what does it mean to be under evaluation but not be a short-term or a long-term
Good question.
implementation?
They haven't put a time frame on it, right?
Not necessarily.
Okay, under evaluation for the purposes of the document that you received, that this document that came through the congressional staff, this one that we're looking through and we're walking through, has, we were still at a point internal to the FAA, to our organization, and our processes for looking at the complete piece of what we might be able to do in those arenas. With that said, I know that once this document came out, we've had a lot of discussion. I just offer to you, like, this was a version. We are 2.5 times beyond that version now with the document, with the living document. In that, we've been able to parse out the things that we've either evaluated, completed evaluation, or decided that they will no longer be under evaluation because we've made a decision. So the next document that you'll see, which we're trying to vet in the final stages as I'm here right now, who knows the time frame of that? I can't offer that. But that the under evaluation piece, there was still a lot of moving parts when we gave this report. So I don't know if that helps to answer your question.
Yeah, I think it does. So I'll paraphrase so that I'm clear in my mind of what is just said. So under evaluation means that at the time of publication, it was still under evaluation by the FAA, and they couldn't put it into another bucket at that point in time.
Correct. Okay.
Can we further assume or extrapolate that some of these that we are going, which is the bulk of it, 52% of this document is under evaluation, that
At the time of publication.
at the time of publication, that you said you're 2.5 times past that, so, what?
The 2.5 times past that is you take a document, you give it to staff,
Yeah.
and you float it around the room, where, you know, we start with a version with Kathleen down there, and by the time it gets down here, we've got 2 other versions, and by the time we get down here, 4 other versions. That's what we're doing.
Okay.
So we're stepping through the process now. As we do that, some of the items will get, you know, cleaned out, better vetted, better answers to, I would offer. So that's what we're working on, and that's the evaluation that we're doing with some of them. Now, I do want to be clear that the evaluation in some of the parts and pieces require other, like statistical modeling, analysis, not just can we do this as the agency, can we step up and do this, or does it fall to another party within our lines of business in the agency?
So I guess for the purposes of our group here in reviewing all of these next steps and next items, not next steps, but next items, how would we like to proceed? Is there value in going through them and discussing them, rehashing them? Because I know that there are issues, I think, that would come up to us from our recommendations. Well, we didn't make the right recommendation. I'd like to make an additional recommendation embedded in that, but we can't do that, okay? We've got to deal with what we recommended, but if they're just saying to us that it's under evaluation, and that's how they're responding, I don't know.
Could I add to that real quick?
Yes.
So, and that's the reason I brought this up, because I expected that answer. And while things have changed, we don't have anything in writing of what's changed and where those items are currently with the FAA. And given the fact that we have 30 minutes left, I'm wondering whether it makes more sense to go to Section 6, which were recommendations that were not endorsed by the FAA, in case there are any questions that we have of the FAA of why those were not endorsed.
What's the pleasure of our roundtable members? Does that sound good to you?
Yes.
I think. Let's follow Jean's lead. How's that? Okay. So Section 6 is on page
46.
I agree.
That's my good idea for the year. I'm done.
Yeah, you're done.
Had your way. Yeah.
You had your one.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
No, that doesn't, okay. I think it's James. No, just putting you, James. We're not doing number 5, we're doing number 6. Oh, right, to page.
Number 5 has to do with the select committee.
Page 46.
Number 6, here we go again. San Francisco runway 28 arrivals.
What page? 46.
Page 46 of the FAA document, and they have indicated that this is, our recommendation is not feasible. It says see Phase 1 report, which is item 1II, which is in our section D, 1DII. Let's go to that first.
James also has up item 15, Appendix B, that has the request as well.
Okay.
No.
Okay. So 1BII is on page 48.
48. Oh, she's found the third one. How come I have...
And this request is determine the feasibility of creating a dual offset approach to the two runways, 28 left and right.
So the only explanation that we have from the FAA is their brief status, and I think Kathleen might be able to elaborate a bit more on that.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair.
Speak really into it so we can hear you, Kathleen.
I was just going to recommend we go to page 24 of the roundtable report, which has an illustration of this. I think that just is so much easier to just take a look at a picture.
Okay.
And I honestly think that the FAA may not have fully
It has an
understood
illustration, and it's on the screen.
Oh, fabulous.
Okay.
Screen's better, so color in this.
Is there?
So I'm going to ask Steve to explain to us exactly why the FAA is saying, no, they cannot help us out here.
Okay, so back to the original piece there in your, I believe our report, it showed that, or no, in yours, it showed Oklahoma City long-term, Oklahoma City, Aeronav Products, in your initial report. They did give us guidance that this would not meet criteria. And doing something like this, where if we were to run this type of traffic, based on the previous conversations we've had about interaction with East Bay, Oakland, and the Diamond arrival in this configuration, this would significantly complicate that airspace. So that was the reasoning that we found that it was not feasible. But baseline, our TERPS developers told us that this was not practical.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Kathleen.
Question?
Yes.
So my biggest concern with this was the fact that the verbiage under status on this item references the feasibility part 1 report, which is a completely different type of recommendation. It was a recommendation that was ill-advised and wasn't feasible, frankly. But this was a different one, and I just want to make sure that what your folks worked on was this recommendation, not the one that's reflected in the status, which was the one in feasibility report 1 was essentially, believe it or not, a recommendation to offset the left only, which, obviously isn't going to work.
Okay.
And that's what's being referenced here, I believe, in feasibility report 1. So I just want to make sure maybe you could just go back and make sure that we were working off of this. And of course, this is a concept. This isn't the drawn, that, right?
Correct.
It's just a concept. Just make sure that what your information from your technicians gave you applies to this recommendation, not the original recommendation in feasibility report 1.
You're referencing something she thinks you may be answering the wrong.
Yeah, I see what you're getting at now. So if they did that, they shouldn't have done that. But I will check.
Just to clarify that we were talking about the same recommendation.
Right.
That upon which you based a decision.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right. I will go back and ask the question about that one for clarity.
Good point. Anybody else have anything on this? So page 20. Okay.
Is such gentleman want to speak?
Oh, yes. Sorry, I didn't see you. Come on over, and there's a hand mic. I think you have to push the button up to turn it on.
This is Stanley from El Granada, Half Moon Bay area. I just want to make a 90-second comment because we're skipping the evaluation, under evaluations 4, and this particular section under G, which is a departure southbound, and there are 13 items which are pretty much the same thing on the nighttime hush item. So I just want everybody to be aware that going down the road, 13 items is a lot, and it's a voice from, I think, a couple thousand, tens of thousands of the peninsula, coastline area. I hope that this can be evaluated because the current stick, fish hook, down to ported is unacceptable.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Thank you.
Yes. Yes, we'll keep an eye on that. I mean, we really want to see what the FAA responds to those items. We understand there's a lot that has to do with that. Okay? All right. So the next elimination was down the bay nighttime departure. And they said that it was increasing the use of runway 10 was not feasible because of the Phase 1 report. Any discussion on that from Gene?
I have a clarification here because we also talked about head-to-head operations, I call them.
Opposite direction.
Opposite direction operations.
ODO.
Yeah, ODO. Does that play into this as well? Because it's not stated here, so.
Yes. It's not stated here. In the Phase 1 report, that was part of the consideration, not a main driver I would offer, but a consideration. And the other piece to this is the Fly Quiet program. That was part of the conversation about getting that updated also.
Are we ready to accept this as if we understand this, I think that it can be, this is their response to us, but like what Kathleen did, if we find that there's a nuance that maybe we can respond and ask that it be clearly looked at, I think we should do that.
Yeah, and to add to that, I would say that remember what we're trying to do is clearly understand their response so that we can provide feedback appropriately. So, yes.
Yeah. You want to clarify some more responses?
Well, I was just going to offer that this statement, I think probably why it's not endorsed by the FAA or we're doing anything more with it, it's more of a runway usage during that time frame type activity. So really not in our wheelhouse, I guess.
And
I don't understand airlines again.
Not in their responsibility because it's a runway, it's on the ground usage.
So is that airlines then? Talking about airline schedules?
The airport.
Airport.
Yeah, it's more, I would offer it's more of an airports type activity. I know that that's probably how we got in Phase 1 report. The discussion probably brought us to that it was not an endorsed item because of whatever reasons the airport has made that decision. It's and also runway 10 does provide its own set of challenges in a variety of ways because of the use of the 2.8s.
So, Elizabeth, you said, are we willing to accept this? No.
Yeah, right.
So the answer is no.
We're not ready for anything. You know, it's been a long 3 hours, so.
Almost. You got.
Would this then become a new work item outside of the response to the FAA? And do we already have it in our work plan so we don't drop something like this?
I think that.
And I know I'm on that committee and I can't remember.
Sure, I know. We're going to talk about next steps and discuss things. So I want to leave a little bit of time for that. How much more do we have? We're almost there, aren't we, Chief?
Yeah, there's 3 more.
Yeah. Pretty much, yeah. So on page 47, we want to create a runway 10 right departure with an immediate left turn to deconflict with opposite direction aircraft. That's what we just kind of spoke about. And FAA said not feasible. So I think this is something that Steve has been telling us, that in August 2013, the requirements have been changed and make it really difficult to do ODO procedures.
Further restricted since that time.
Ah, okay. Okay.
Can I ask a dumb question? So the
As long
ODO.
as it's not going to take long.
Okay, so in some time past, we had some head-on near misses, is what I'm assuming here. That's what we were talking about, things in the past. Is it because we've got pilots coming in with different levels of training, hence Ariana versus other airlines coming in? I know that. So why?
Why not do the opposite direction
I
operation?
mean, I understand. I would rather not be going straight on with somebody coming at me,
Correct. Opposite direction operations are in use as we speak. They're being done today, probably in the Bay Area at some airport. The San Francisco configuration and volume of traffic and geography of the surrounding airspace does not, it's not conducive to positioning aircraft under the current rules to perform an opposite direction operation. Before an aircraft, if you put an aircraft on a runway and you clear them for takeoff, that aircraft has to roll before the head-on traffic in this scenario reaches a point in space. That may be 15 miles, it may be 20 miles, it may be 7 miles. There's a lot of factors that are involved in that, including the type of aircraft. To do the operation here with the variety of aircraft that you have using the surface out here and the complexity of the airspace, we can't. It just, under the current rules and that are in place, this facility cannot perform opposite direction operations.
Okay, I understand that from a technical perspective, but I'm going to be very candid. The end result is that the communities adjacent to the airport are bearing the brunt of a whole range of different noises. And, okay, during the daytime for the greater good, okay, but at night, no. And no. We're going to have to start pushing back, and I keep hearing SFO, we can't have a curfew. Well, San Jose has a curfew. And I know the airport doesn't want to hear that, San Francisco doesn't want to hear that because they're making money, but okay, if we cannot do these technical procedures, you cannot make those communities stay up all night. Regardless, any of our communities stay up all night. So the answer is going to have to be a more strongly worded no.
All right. So, you have a question on the, yes?
While an ODO operation may not be feasible, those planes, if I understood correctly a few minutes, those planes that would be landing on 28 potentially could land on. That would do the ODO head-to-head conflict.
But what does that do to Pleasanton?
Departure on runway 10, if private flights came in rather than on 28 at night, that would remove the head-to-head conflict issue.
Yeah, that's, I just know that's not a preferred configuration for the airport environment.
I think the simple answer to that is yes. If you're not having the 2-8 arrivals and the 10 departures at the same time, then you can evaluate increased use of the 10 departures, but you have to do that in a way that is not utilizing 28 arrivals.
We have about 15 minutes left here, and the next couple of recommendations have to do with the Menlo Waypoint, but that was not part of the roundtable's recommendations. It is specifically to the Select Committee, both of them. And I know that we have a representative here from Menlo Park who'd like to say something about this. So, Peter, you have to push the button to make it green. Green. There you go.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Peter Otaki, Menlo Park Council Member. Yes, this is obviously a Select Committee recommendation, but I did have a question because it bears on a couple of our recommendations that are in the roundtable recommendations in the under evaluation section. So the very last one that says Select Committee recommended Menlo Waypoint altitude at Menlo above 5,000. FAA said not feasible. See Phase 1 report. Just to save everyone time, what the Phase 1 report said, raising Menlo would create too steep a descent gradient to the runway for IFR operations. The reason why I read that was because the explanation at that time, and continues to be, is IFR operations. If you look on page 28, where we have two recommendations from the roundtable, both suggesting Menlo Waypoint vectoring traffic above 5,000, and then VMC aircraft should cross Menlo vicinity, Menlo at 5,000. I just wanted to clarify that I'm hoping that the not feasible is not going to prejudge what the FAA comes back on the under evaluation recommendations that this committee has made around that 5,000 altitude. In particular, the nuance was, IFR versus visual flight, that during visual flight, perhaps there may be more latitude to be at that higher 5,000-foot altitude. So that's all. I just wanted to, and Steve, it's nice to see you again. So.
It's nice to see you too. Okay, so for the VMC, the VFR visual approach, we don't tell the aircraft to maintain cleared visual approach, runway 28 left. So VMC, that statement in there, they're going to be in that environment in visual meteorological conditions and restricting their altitude at that point without the condition of a charted visual approach that has that embedded in it. That would be the piece to that. The IFR 5,000 at Menlo, we have taken that back and given that to our procedural development people and had them look at it. In Phase 1, we were told by the people that build these procedures that 5,000 at Menlo was undoable by distance from the airport for that being a fix on the approach. So part of what the work group team that's developing procedures right now, they're taking a look at the vicinity of Menlo, what altitude can we get in that arena. So it was clear that, yes, you would like 5,000. We're trying to figure out what might be best in that environment. We were told in Phase 1 report that 5,000 was untenable.
Okay, so it's not, make sure I'm trying to understand, not necessarily prejudging that you're still looking at the different scenarios at altitude at Menlo.
Yeah, we didn't just say, they want 5, nah, we're done.
Right.
No, we're actually looking at, because Menlo is, and as we all know, is part of the interaction of everything around here, including that thing called the surfer. And so that's definite part of the mix, a definite part of what's in play for all the activity that the FAA is doing to try and make the environment better. So we're aware that you would like 5,000. Getting 5,000 there is, but, we've talked about and we've done some creative things throughout the NAS for the mix again here at this airport. It's going to be hard to get 5,000 there, but we are looking at what we could do in that environment.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Are there any other comments from the roundtable or the public on this last issue? I think we're finished with our recommendations that were not part of the FAA's action as it pertains to the roundtable. So, thank you, Steve, for being here. Thank you, Jean, and thank you, everyone else. I think next steps. Go ahead, Sue.
You made one of you made a comment earlier about proceed. Oh no, that's not my note. Oh, here we go. Customer forums, user customer forums that you have. I'm not sure if you said they were quarterly or whether they're monthly. Would those be of value to us to be communicating with?
Normally, the customer forums are discussions that we have with the airlines, our traffic management people, the local air traffic facilities.
That sounds enticing to me, like maybe they...
Going for the juggler, honey, watch it.
Yeah.
They're not public, open to the public?
Well, but we could send a detailed letter.
Is Bert still around the corner?
Yes.
Bert?
There.
The customer forums, are you involved with those? No, okay. So I will get some information back to Elizabeth about that. I know we've done them in airports all around the nation, and I just presume I walk through the terminal and go into a conference room. They're probably not public, but because I don't think
I'm not planning on going there,
but they are good information databases that were a discussion, especially if, you know, an airport authority is involved in it, and I don't know that that's true in all cases. You know, it'd be
and
good.
the airlines are there paying attention, so I think I heard a lot that...
Right. But we do it and address challenges that we're having in the system. So things like, you know, delays and weather issues and a major piece of equipment. Are they going to tear out a runway and there's going to be less capacity at San Francisco, Los Angeles, those kinds of things. That's why we do those customer forums.
Thank you.
So let's just do, so next steps.
Oh, next
Janet?
Okay, go ahead, go.
No, yeah, next steps, I would, I put on the agenda that, which may be taken through our legislative roundtable subcommittee, but I think there might be another next step that we can do in conjunction with that. And if Jean and I could, you know, with other members of our team here, put our heads together and kind of come up with a response or a summary of what we've heard and other questions that we think that are just still out there that, like, you know, like the thing that you raised about the, Kathleen raised about the phase 1 study, that we could put together and send to Steve so that he can have something, because I know he's got a steel trap memory, but between now and, you know, a flight back up to Seattle.
Get to the airplane?
Yeah, you know, there is some, you know, fruitfulness. Do you think that we could do that, Jean?
Yeah, we should do that.
You want to do that? Does that sound reasonable, and we can follow up
For
that
all of
way?
us, too, so we have...
Yes, yes. And Deborah?
Are we going to be scheduling another one to
Technical
go
working
through
group?
these ones that are still in flux?
Yes.
You mean under evaluation?
Right.
So unless we hear from the FAA as to their position on those, I'm not sure what exactly we would achieve.
Is there an estimated time frame when they will be done?
He said no. I've heard through the grapevine that it's going to be kind of fall-ish. Is that kind of fall-ish?
The official word I am allowed to say is by the end of fall.
By the end of fall, which is December 22nd, December 20.
Winter,
What?
It's the solstice.
But I'm hoping it's before October 2nd.
Well,
We don't have any more specific date than that. We're just, the administrator, regional administrator said that we can say the words by the end of fall. We're all hoping for earlier, but that's what we've been told we can say.
Right. And I offer that this is a really good conversation because the document is living, and I can take back these tidbits of information and get some clarity, and maybe that'll help to address some of the issues in the final document. So thank you for your input, and I think it's been a good discussion. So.
Great, thank you. All right.
If I could also, because I was going to say along the same lines as Steve just did, is that, you know, it is a living document. So we have done what we can to this point, I think, having gone through the measures that aren't under evaluation still. And so as those things get updated, whenever they do, I mean, if it's the end of fall or whenever it is, then we do this again and get those answers. So it really doesn't matter the timeline necessarily. Yes, we want to get through this, but as long as we keep understanding this is a living document and we continue to have this discussion with the FAA, I think it's all we could really hope for.
Yes.
Where did she go?
So first to me, based on the discussion today.
Here, you want a microphone? Speak right into it. Okay.
It occurred to me, based on what I heard, that things are moving and some are more settled than others, but it's not clear to me how things are going to be decided because all of these things have impact possibly on other people. And so the more, you know, departure south over the bay, et cetera, is going to impact any bodega east and so on. So my question to the group is who is going to be making these decisions?
That's right. My understanding is that all of this, the FAA is here in respect to the Congress members to work with us as a representative body of our Bay Area region here. And they will then make their response. They don't make the response to us. They're making the response directly to the Congress members. And at that point, those decisions, I mean, the decisions will be implemented and made based on the FAA's decision to implement and try to make things better because they want to make things nice with the Congress and for us too. If some of those responses are not acceptable to us, we then have to figure out other ways to work with the FAA or with other agencies to help. I mean, it's not going to be final. I mean, we're not going to get everything we want. So, it's just true. We're very grateful, fortunate to live in a metropolitan area where we have an international airport close at hand. We don't have to drive 2.5 hours like Denver does to go out. But it comes at a price. But what price? Sometimes we have to push back, as Ann says. We have to at some point. Anyway, that's all we can do. And the select committee, I think that with the supervisors, they have to kind of have a voice at some point. So we'll take another round, and then we're going to adjourn the meeting because I think it's after 3. And, after 4. Ann.
Just one thing that I think could be helpful proactively that we can actually do in this interim period potentially as we were going through this today is that I would ask if our consultants could potentially help this group and anybody here to come up with those metrics that we will need based on whatever recommendations the FAA makes. There's no reason why we can't start that analysis. We know, for instance, it's going to be Bodega East versus Bodega West.
Yeah.
Steve has some of that data. What data are we going to need to be able to assess the changes when they come, however they come?
Yeah.
So I think that's a proactive step we can take and not wait for that report and not worry about that timing because we'll be ready for it, at least from that perspective when it comes. So if others agree, I think it would be a good use of our consultants' resources and expertise.
That sound good? Okay, Sue?
That sounds good. I think, too, for ourselves and for myself and for the public, I think we have residents who are wanting and expecting solutions tomorrow. So I think that our minds and our energies are going to be looking for whatever ways. So I've learned a lot today that it was looking to the FAA for everything, and I had suspicions that it would be helpful to go to airlines, and now I'm even more convinced. That's just a couple things.
Okay.
That being said, call for a motion to adjourn. So moved. There we go. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice marathon session.
I don't like this.
No, I have run marathons.
Yes, really?
Yeah,
You do?
I
Yeah.
run 3.
Okay.
And, my first marathon around here was over 4 miles.
Yeah. Everything should be, yeah, everything is there. Yeah.
And I